Okay, well, hello everyone. My name is Karla Hernandez. I am a fourth year Spanish Cultural Studies major, and today I'll be presenting my research. My mentor for this project is Dr. Alessandro Fornasari, and my research is titled, like mentioned, Transborder Realities. To begin, my research takes place in the transborder community composed of sister cities, Calexico, California, and Mexicali, Baja California, Mexico. A little bit about this location, as we can see in the image to the right, Calexico is above that US-Mexico border, and it is surrounded in fields, which is why agriculture and commerce thrive here due to that great influx of workers and consumers coming from Mexico. Calexico has around 39,000 residents, and it is that tiny little spot in the image surrounded by fields. And on the opposite side of the border, we have Mexicali with around 1 million residents. And it is more of a modern progressive city where the maquiladora business thrives. These sister cities are separated by a border wall, which doesn't really look like a wall whatsoever. And I'm gonna go ahead and show you a few images of this so-called wall. So on the left, we have an image of the Dia de los Muertos homage. It is for all the lives lost crossing the border into the US. And this is what people would see in their vehicle while making line to cross the border to the US. And on the opposite side, on the right side, we have an image of the Grand Plaza outlets right next to the border. I actually worked here and people were very shocked to see the border right behind the shopping outlet. I guess it's like a very foreign concept. But as you can see within the border, rather than being more of a wall, it's more like a fence with gaps in between itself, in which sometimes you could see like families holding hands through the wall, and or sometimes the outlets hold concerts, and people on the Mexico side of the border will watch these concerts and enjoy them from their side. So this so-called wall doesn't really separate much more than it does allow for both communities to merge together culturally, socially, and even economically. So sorry. A lot of you might be wondering what the term transborder even means and why I'm using it to describe this location. Well, I define the term transborder as an in-between borders of identity. The term borderlands could also be an appropriate definition for transborders, which is it is a mezcla of neither being fully of Mexico, but neither fully of the US. Not to mention that Calexico is a 98% Spanish-speaking community due to its close proximity to Mexico. And because of the location, residents on either side of the border use the location to their advantage, where we can see people crossing from Calexico to Mexicali, from the US to Mexico, to shop, visit family, and even purchase medical services and pharmaceuticals at a much more affordable price than within the United States. Likewise, people from Mexicali cross to Calexico to work, visit family, shop, and more importantly, go to school, which is my research topic. Not only are these transborder relations used for the economic advantages, but also educational, where we can see students all along the US-Mexico border cross the border every day to go to school in the United States in order to pursue a higher education. And I happen to be one of those transborder students. I myself had to cross the border every day for school into the US from Mexicali to Calexico, from kinder to 12th grade. So that is what inspired my research. And my experience being a transborder student and seeing so many other students like me inspired me to research this topic specifically. And being a transborder student, I experienced and saw a lot of injustice within my community and wanted to find out more. And although there is research on this location, there is a great lack of research on the students and the effects that residing here has on them and their educational journeys, which also inspired me to fill in those gaps of information. Due to the lack of research, I provide a window into the lives of these transborder students to bring exposure to the reality faced by many of them on this transborder community on the US-Mexico border. So for my research, Transborder Realities, I consider this a type of new journalism that focuses on the stories of individuals as a way to bring the realities of many forward. For this, I chose to conduct an autoethnographic research that uses a testimony genre to provide a collective voice for students within this community. To do so, I interviewed 5 transborder student alumni with different residential and socioeconomic backgrounds from either Calexico or Mexicali who experienced this injustice within the educational side of Calexico High School, the only public high school in Calexico. I allowed and I welcomed these transborder students to share their firsthand experiences and showcase the reality of living in such a complex and culturally rich community and the effects it had on their educational endeavors. And being a part of this community allowed me to voice their lived realities. So it felt very appropriate. The goal of Transborder Realities was to use these stories to show the limitations that Calexico High School imposes on their students in hopes of decreasing the maltreatment of transborder students trying to pursue a higher education in the United States. To do so, I split my research into 3 sections. The first being the Mexicali versus Calexico kids. When interviewing the Calexico alumni on their educational experiences, 2 terms that were repeatedly used when referring to students who came from Mexicali and crossed the border for school, and those who resided in Calexico were Mexicali kids versus Calexico kids. To better understand what those classifications entailed, I looked at testimonials from 3 students with different residency backgrounds who attended school in Calexico. For this section specifically, I used 2 Mexicali kids and 1 Calexico kid. So what even is a Mexicali kid and what does their day-to-day look like? Well, being a Mexicali kid is much harder than many may think. A usual day for them starts around early in the morning, around 4 or 5 a.m. with seemingly normal morning routines where they get ready, brush their teeth, maybe grab a bite for breakfast if they have time. But around 5:30 a.m., they head out to the linea, or the U.S.-Mexico port of entry, where one can cross through the vehicle or pedestrian port of entry. Mexicali kids commonly cross through the pedestrian port of entry, which means they walk through the border. As you can see in that image, people are making line to cross the border. And the wait times there range from 30 minutes to 2 or more hours, which is why they wake up so early. And upon arrival, the students may see familiar faces of other students who are also crossing the border to get to school, but they may also see a large number of field workers, mothers with small children, employees trying to get to their jobs, all a variety of different people trying to get across this dreadful linea. And not only did many students have to wait in line for hours, but after they finally crossed the border, they had to endure a 20 to 30-minute walk to school, which doesn't sound crazy, but the climate gets very hot in the summer, so up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer some days, so it's not an enjoyable walk. It is important to mention that Mexicali kids do carry around a stigma of being lazy, dumb, and troublemaking, and that is placed upon them since their arrival to the United States. So in this section, I had 2 Mexicali kids talk about the ways that they adapted and managed their time in order to be able to live their transborder lifestyle. One of the students explained how his day would begin, so I'm gonna quote him. One port of entry opens up at 6 a.m. So what I would do to make sure I got to school on time is wake up at 3 or 4 a.m., drive to the border, and just sleep in my car and wait until the border opens up. He mentioned how this routine got so tedious that it unmotivated him to attend community college, and recalled his educational experience in high school being predominantly negative due to the fact that he had to cross the border every day for school. Another part of this section is the feelings of each group towards one another. The Mexicali kids described the Calexico kids as entitled and even mentioned how they were treated as less than or as an other at Calexico High School. And all the students interviewed agreed that there was a definite division between both groups, as well as a competitive and hostile environment between all of them. And the 3 Mexicali kids recalled instances where they experienced a variety of microaggressions from the Calexico kids who had a superiority complex due to the fact that they resided in Calexico. These microaggressions included being called a beaner, a paisa, tecolín, anaco, regardless if we were all ethnically the same, which is Mexican. And when looking at the division between both of these parties, I came to the conclusion that it ultimately came down to the intersectionality of both socioeconomic status and residency that caused these differences to be reinforced. Ultimately, the Calexico kids showcased that they are better than the Mexicali kids because they had access to U.S. resources, which include a home, transportation, commodities representing socioeconomic status, something the Mexicali kids do not have access to. These advantages led to a sort of power relation between both groups, as well as the demeaning of Mexicali kids, and that differentiation still persists at Calexico High School to this day. So the next section is experiences in the educational system of Calexico. Here I asked all participants to give me a negative or positive experience that they had in Calexico High School. And not surprisingly, most could only recall negative experiences. They all agreed on the low quality of teaching from the staff at Calexico High School, and they even had anecdotes about staff ranging from advisors to teachers to even principals. They also recalled Calexico High School's sole push to only apply to the community college in the Valley, which is Imperial Valley College. And they all mentioned that they were often discouraged when they mentioned applying to other schools like UCs or Cal States. Rather than pushing their students to pursue a higher education, Calexico High School staff discouraged them because they didn't really believe in their educational potential, which is terrible. And I myself was also discouraged to apply to a 4-year institution, but here I am 4 years later about to graduate from UCR, which is great. And now we have the last section, which is titled Language in Calexico. The Calexico High School staff is often praised for their bilingual abilities, although being a bilingual teacher in this community should be necessary in order to equally communicate with all students. In a 98% Spanish-speaking community, one would think that bilingualism would be praised and welcomed. However, it was a shared experience for students to be told to not speak Spanish because we are in the US. And students with accents or mispronunciations, specifically Mexicali kids, were mocked and ridiculed by peers and even staff, which often led to them becoming embarrassed when speaking English. I consider this a relational power dynamic in which we can see that within that same group of minorities, that same group of pure Mexicans, the students differentiated themselves through their abilities and pronunciations of the English language, and they all became a part of these social hierarchies among themselves by doing so. Which leads me to my next point, that although a majority of the microaggressions were done between students, they were also done by staff in school. Daniel's story is a particularly adequate one to explain the way in which Spanish was shamed at Calexico High School by staff, so I'm gonna go ahead and quote him. He says, during my senior year of high school, I was one of the 3 people selected to audition to give the graduation speech at commencement. I decided to do my speech in Spanish because we live in a community where 99% is Hispanic or Mexican, where not even 50 of the people here speak English. So it would be ignorant to say it in English when majority of the public wasn't going to be able to understand it. Daniel happened to audition in front of 3 CHS staff members, and he continues by saying, during my audition, I instantly got the feeling that everyone was judging me. And at the end, I got rejected, and the other 2 who presented their speech in English got selected. After the audition, the only question asked by the staff members was why I decided to make my speech in Spanish. After that, I talked to one of the judges, and she told me that I was a chicalón, and that I should stick to what chicalones do, which is not pursue a higher education, since we chicalones aren't able to fit into that environment. By the way, chicalón is a derogatory term for someone who's from Mexicali, specifically from Baja California in general, not to be confused with Chicano. So in a predominantly Spanish-speaking community where the Spanish language should be praised, it is instead ridiculed and shamed. And the person who happened to make that comment to Daniel was a vice principal of the school with a last name of Mexican origin, whom we will call Miss X. And these experiences with authoritative figures like this one can have a detrimental effect on the student's self-esteem, self-worth, and follow them throughout their lives, which Daniel also tells us more about. He says, my last year in high school made me feel like I was not ready to go out into the world. It lowered my self-esteem in regards to my language, caused me many mental health problems, including depression and anxiety. Those comments still haunt me to this day. This is only a part of Daniel's story, which shows the severity and impact that comments made by staff to students have at Calexico High School. And if this happened to Daniel and went unnoticed, how many other students have endured a similar experience to this one? So when finishing my interviews, I asked all 5 interviewees the same last question. Would you return or raise your children in Calexico, taking into consideration your educational upbringing here? Emphasis on the education only. Again, not surprisingly, they all said that although they enjoy the close connection to their roots, they would not return due to the negative experiences they had within the Calexico education system. Although the responses were predominantly negative, the participants shared how the educational experiences they had at Calexico High School made them never want to return to Calexico, which in a sense has helped them reach for the stars when it comes to their current academic and career paths. In a community where academic goals are belittled and limited, Calexico students choose to better themselves in order to reject the stigmas that come with being a transborder student and not return to Calexico. To conclude, the lack of information regarding transborder students' experiences in Calexico motivated me to show the reality of their lives and the obstacles they had to endure to get to where they are now. That lack of information and research on students in the area has, in a sense, aided to the persistence of negative treatment towards them. I hope to have presented their stories and voices as a way to unveil the negative treatment present within the educational community of Calexico in hopes of validating these students' experiences and decreasing the mistreatment of transborder students trying to pursue a higher education in the United States. Lastly, I would like to thank the funding provided by the Chancellor's Research Fellowship at UCR, and I would like to thank Dr. Alessandro Fornasari for the guidance and mentorship throughout the entirety of my research project. And I would also like to thank the 5 transborder students who participated and offered valuable data and experiences using this project. Thank you.